Hey, this is Craig Zingerline. I'm going to talk to you about how to become a kick-ass growth product manager. All right, so some of the companies that I've been fortunate to work with or work for are on the right here. Sandbox is a B2C platform that connects the military members with their supporters while they're at boot camp and beyond. That's where I'm currently the chief product officer and doing a lot of things on the growth side of the business. Prior to that, I was at Upside Business Travel running the growth team. Before that, I had founded my own B2B SaaS platform, Votion. Down below there are a few of the companies that I've been fortunate enough to work with on either a contract or advisory basis or that I've worked with or for over the years. So I've done quite a bit of stuff across multiple different industries and verticals. Some of these companies have been bootstrapped and some have had very, very large marketing budgets. So I've got a wide spectrum of experiences kind of across the board. Okay, so what is growth and why is it important? I think about growth in terms of connecting value. So growth starts by ensuring that the product provides value to both the customer and the company the entire way through the customer life cycle. And this is a little bit different than how maybe a traditional product view would look at being very much customer only focused and not really internally focused. The role of growth is really to look at both and to make sure that you're providing value and growing your business as well as providing value to your customers. So the difference between a traditional and a growth PM, there's a few. Traditional PMs are typically going to own a product, multiple products, or a set of features around a product. Growth PMs are going to typically own metrics across the organization. So they may also own the product or features, but they're likely going to be much more metrics focused, and that's what they're going to be measured on. Growth PMs also usually will lead experimentation efforts across the organization, and they'll live at the intersection of many different departments. Some growth teams and growth PMs will also own acquisition and demand gen. It really depends on the team structure. I've been in situations where I've owned both marketing and growth, and have been within product organizations. Other times I've been in situations where marketing is completely separate. The role of the growth team and the growth PM is to really bridge that gap. And depending on the situation, you may find yourself getting very, very deep into kind of core marketing land, but that's not always the case. So in terms of user flow and PM touchpoints, users flow through the product suite. They touch marketing and then they move through the product where engineering's got a lot of focus. They may work with the UX team. Obviously, they're seeing all of the experiences that are being created for them digitally and even offline. And they may intersect with customer success, operations, and other departments. So the flow of users kind of happens linearly. And also, obviously, customers will come back to your product, hopefully. As the growth product manager, you're really going to be working with each of these different departments within your company, as well as with external stakeholders and the user along that entire journey. As a growth PM, you're probably going to own all or part of the pirate metrics. And so I'll briefly cover these. So acquisition is getting people to your site, app, or experience. It also may involve awareness, so just getting people aware of your brand and driving people to the brand. In marketing organizations, they'll talk a lot about acquisition and awareness. And so, again, as the growth PM, you might be responsible for both. The next tier down is activation. This is getting people to take some action that you want them to take. That feeds into retention, so getting people to come back again and again to experience your product value. Revenue is getting people to spend money with you. Or if you are not a revenue-focused company, a lot of earlier stage growth companies that are funded don't worry too much about revenue. They're mostly worried about kind of core growth metrics, so user acquisition and things like that. At that view, time or some other metric might be your currency, but always keep revenue in mind. And then referrals is getting people to tell others about you. And you'll notice the arrow from referral up to acquisition, you form a growth loop there where referrals really does feed the top of the funnel. So why focus on growth-based product management? Why is this important? Because most startups fail, usually not because of bad products, but because of unvetted features and products, poor marketing, or other market-related issues. And the numbers are very, very sobering. In 2018, CB Insights did a postmortem on 101 startups. and they talk to them about why their startups failed. And this list on the right are the top 20 reasons why the startups failed. So how many of these actually have the word product in them? I believe only one. All right, so keep that in mind. In 2006, Paul Graham put together a really great blog post called The 18 Mistakes That Kill Startups. Again, not a lot to do with the product here. So I crunched these two different studies, and then I looked at some of my own efforts that I've had along the years, and roughly 74% of failures have something to do with growth. So that's why growth is so important. It's really critical. So how does the growth PM change this? Well, you got to start by doing the right thing. So by ensuring that the right thing is built at the right time is a good way to get started. And you want to make sure that the metrics and measurement that are tied to feature and product development are actually in place, and those are things that you're looking at. It's not about just building products or building features. It's actually about the measurement and the metrics and your ability to drive growth through those efforts. You also want to make sure that both sets of stakeholders, the customers and the business, gain value with each release that you put out there. And you'll also want to make sure that the experimentation and all of the iterations that you're working on are becoming part of your core product development lifecycle. So you really tend to bring this growth mindset into the product organization. So one way to look at this is that the way we typically approach building features is often wrong. We've always got a ton of ideas. So you've got this amazing idea. You think this feature is really going to move the needle. And so you spend 3 sprints building. Then you launch and you're like, we're going to rake it in with this feature. And then a month later, you realize, that did not work. What happened? Okay, we just need to build one more thing. Maybe we just didn't finish the feature, or it wasn't robust enough, or we just didn't do it the right way, or it's too minimal. So you have this updated set of ideas. You think that's going to move the needle. You build. It's only going to take 2 more sprints. You launch it, and you think this time you're really going to rake it in. What happens? Usually disappointment or failure. I won't say all of the time, but much of the time this happens. So as a PM, what are you supposed to do here? One way to approach this problem is to think about the process and the way you're approaching the product roadmap. So I'll propose an approach to building features and products. Step 1 is to validate the need first with real users. It sounds simple, but you'll be surprised at how many PMs don't actually do this. Get something basic out early if you can, and then iterate quickly. Leverage feedback from the start from real customers, and use a hypothesis-driven approach along the way. So you can build out your hypothesis, and if you read through this, it's by doing or not doing something, we believe that another thing will be impacted by something. So PMs just need to give more thought to marketing. So at the product level, there's some questions that you're going to want to ask yourself. For example, why do I need this feature? Who benefits from it? What might this detract from? It's not uncommon for rollouts to happen, whether it's a feature or even a new product, and then you start having some unintended consequences somewhere else along your product funnel. So I've seen this over and over and over again. You launch something that's really great, but it actually takes away from something else that you've got out there. So you just really need to ask this question up front and proactively attack this problem. What's our goal with this release? And then how do we measure the success or failure of this release? And what's the simplest way that we can validate this idea? I've had product workshops that I've run where students will get together, they'll prototype something in a couple hours, and we'll literally walk over to a coffee shop and show the very unpolished, unfinished idea that's in Balsamiq or InVision or a platform where we can actually run a prototype and show the idea to somebody in the real world, and you get feedback. The first thing it forces you to do is get used to talking to strangers, which if you're going to be a good growth PM, you're going to have to get comfortable with that. The second thing you'll get is an unbiased input on how viable the thing that you just put out there is. And a lot of times you'll just get some really early feedback. So I'd urge you just to get out there and try to validate whatever it is you're working on. And you can do this even if you're at a larger corporation. Be mindful of other work. And so what's happening outside of the product view? So ask yourself some additional questions. What and who do I need to support this feature? Do I need to write content, emails? Am I building drip campaigns? What other parts of the marketing funnel will this change if I roll this out? How are users going to learn about this? Are we blasting it out to everybody? Do we tell everybody about every feature release? There's oftentimes a negative correlation with retention if you're just blasting people with product updates all day long. Most people don't really care. Most people aren't your power user, right? So how are they going to learn about it? You need to be smart about that. What happens if this rollout fails? Are you comfortable rolling back? You just put a bunch of time into building something. Are you okay with the fact that it failed and that you have to actually turn it off? So if you're not comfortable with that, then it's time to revisit why you're doing this in the first place. So that leads to growth-led product development. So growth-led product development is really experimentation at the core of product development. I often think about this in terms of the step functions of growth. So in the early days, you go from doing nothing to doing something. So your 0 phase to 1 phase is where you test something very small, usually very manually. So this might be showing something to a few users. At the 1 to 10 stage, you're adding a bit more polish. You might get a little bit scientific at that point. The 10 to 100, you're starting to scale your idea. Maybe you've got team buy-in, the idea becomes a feature. Maybe it's something that you build. And then later on, you get into this state of optimization, so constant incremental improvements. This is the way to build features and products if you want to ensure that you're going to do the right thing at the right time. So here's an example experiment. My company Sandbox is a digital physical letter product. Our customers are friends and family members of military recruits at basic training, at boot camp. So it's this really cool kind of mobile first product. 6 to 8 weeks is the length of time at which recruits at boot camp lose their phones. So this is a really, really, really big deal. And the founders of our company were really smart. They were looking for problems to solve within the military kind of meets the civilian world. And they kind of stumbled upon this untapped segment of the market, which is boot camp. And so we really work at this level where there's a critical need for this period of time when the recruit doesn't have their phone. So we send overnight letters for roughly 20% of the cost that it would take somebody outside of us or a user themselves to send a letter. So the way our platform works is that supporters of the military recruits digitally compose letters. They hit send, just like sending a text message. We print all the letters in-house and we overnight them to the bases. And it's this magical connection that happens, kind of bridging the gap from online to offline. And it's a really cool thing, and it solves a really big need, huge pain point, and does a bunch of good. We sell bundles of letters, so anywhere from a single letter to 70 letters, and they have different price points. Obviously, one is the cheapest. So we wanted to run a set of experiments. Now, we had built an MVP promo code system, kind of a generic way to just test the validity of putting promo codes in front of potential buyers. We had anecdotal evidence that we could increase purchase conversions by offering some kind of discount. So we had to build some minimal set of features to support our hypotheses. So while we didn't strictly follow the step functions of growth kind of to a T, we did have enough anecdotal evidence at scale to say, hey, like it's worth building something early here. So we did that. We wanted to also de-risk our situation by testing only on users that had purchased before. So we didn't want to go to new users. We didn't want to change behavior or risk changing behavior to the degree that it would really risk our revenue. So we built in this constraint that said only customers who have purchased before can see discounts. Here's our hypothesis. By leveraging discounts for existing customers, we can increase revenue for a test cohort compared to our control. So our big test here was, could we drive purchase value up for a cohort of users against whatever our baseline or our control was? So in the 0 to 1 days, when we went from doing nothing to something, really what we were looking to do is validate our hypothesis, and we wanted to set up this test. So we decided on discounting what we call our 3-letter bundle. We thought that'd be a good start. So we manually picked a small cohort of people that we put into this test. And we set a very strict time frame as well to, again, constrain the risk. And so then we got a cohort of users into a test group and we ran this campaign. We were not looking for statistical significance yet. That really isn't critical. We were looking more for directional signal. So here we go. This is where we're at in the 0 to 1 game. So this was our baseline or our control. So in our control, 70% of buyers purchased 1 letter, 18.6% purchased 3, and then 11.3% bought some other bundle that was larger than 3. Again, we sell up to 70 at a time. So our first test, we wanted to discount the 3-letter bundle. And what's interesting is you can see here that the effort worked in terms of driving down the percentage of people who only purchased 1 letter and driving up the purchase, the 3-letter purchasers. However, what's buried in this other revenue here were these much larger ticket purchases. And because we brought that percentage down by discounting the 3-letter bundle, our revenue compared to our control actually was less. So this was a failed test. We ran it again. So a week or 2 later, we ran pretty much the same thing. We changed some of the messaging. This time we sold even more of the 3-letter bundle. So in some ways this was successful, right? Like we moved people from buying 1 to buying 3. But again, because of that other revenue, that other bucket, we brought that down, which means that more people were buying the 1 and the 3 and fewer people were buying the 15, the 35, and the 70 letter bundles. It again was a failure because our revenue was less. So we went back and did some analysis and we thought, okay, this is interesting. We can move the behavior up the price matrix. That's cool. But what we made on those larger purchases were lost due to lower overall volume. So we just didn't get the volume at the upper end of the spectrum to make up the rest of the revenue that was lost. So the first 2 tests were basically a failure. That's the way we looked at it. But we did learn a bunch of stuff. So we said, okay, let's revisit the hypothesis and maybe make some new plans. We did not change the product. No change at all. So the next set of iterations, we thought about that 0 to 1 and we decided, okay, let's take on a little bit more risk. We wanted to test our biggest seller, which is the single letter purchase. So again, we're at scale, so we've got a lot of volume coming through. We had already basically de-risked the efforts a little bit in the first iteration. We failed, we lost a little bit of money, but it wasn't a total showstopper, not a huge deal. So we said, let's open up the pool a little bit. Okay. So at this point, we brought in a few more folks. We, if you've got a data analyst or a data science team, pull them in. If you've got a designer, a UX lead, you might want to add some polish to your test. You may want to add some copywriting. The 0 to 1 game is meant to be very low-fi. It's low risk. This next realm, the 1 to 10, you're starting to bake the idea a little bit more. So you're getting a little bit more sophisticated. So give it a little bit more thought, but don't give it too much thought. So here we go. So our first test on the dollar off the single letter, you'll see that a similar thing happened where we drove fewer people buying the single letter, which is weird because we heavily discounted that. So even though we put this in front of existing buyers and we said, you can get $1 off our single letter, they still didn't buy that, but they bought more of the 3 and they bought more of the other category too. Not as much as the control, but the percentage of the people that bought the 3 plus that bought the larger bundles added up to a win. So we did 8% additional revenue here. Now we thought we're onto something. Okay, so the next iteration. So we learned a bunch of stuff, a couple failures, a win. We thought about how do we scale this thing? So if we can increase the visibility of the test, we would do that here. We thought of some new ways to test the hypothesis though. It's worth mentioning though, if you fail at this point, then you probably have some statistical significance and maybe your idea wasn't so great after all. Or conversely, maybe it was a great idea and you're starting to get some wins under your belt. If you succeed, at this point you might have a feature or a backlog. For us, this meant that looking at that risk equation again. So what we decided is we wanted to remove that first time sender constraint. And we went for more of a blanket approach. So whereas before you had to be a customer to see these discounts, now we decided you didn't yet have to be a customer. If you just came into our purchase funnel, regardless of if you've purchased before or not, you're going to be able to see the discount. It was only at this point that we built a new set of features to scale on. So again, we went through many weeks of testing. And I didn't show you all of the data along the way, it'd take too long, but we did many tests before we even touched the product. So we're just vetting and validating what we're doing. So here we go. The next iteration was that 10 to 100 where we start to scale. We got some team buy-in, idea becomes a bigger feature. So this leads to growth-led development. So growth-led development is really when you're looking at vetted and tested ideas. So you get this amazing idea, you think it's going to move the needle. You build, it's going to take 3 sprints, you launch, and then you've got a winner, right? Because you followed the process. In our case, the 10 to 100 tests, we put this out to all users. We showed this to different cohorts. We ran multiple tests. By the end of the day, when we got through what I'm showing as the 6th iteration here, it was probably the 10th or 12th iteration in reality, we were able to get up to 25% additional revenue per cohort compared to the control. And so look at these numbers for a little bit. We dramatically changed the purchase flow. And we did it pretty quickly, and we did it with 2 iterations of the product. And this was not weeks and weeks of work. This batch of tests here came from less than 1 sprint of work. So again, we vetted it and validated the ideas before we went into feature development. That's how you make sure you're making the right decisions at the product level. So the next part of the step functions growth is optimization. So this is where you're looking at constant incremental improvements. So for us, that means we're always on. We've got a discount that appears based on business logic that we've validated through our different tests. And we continue to test different hypotheses to different cohorts along the way. So this work has contributed to roughly 20% overall increase in revenue compared to the control, and we're able to do this on an ongoing basis. Now, this doesn't mean that we were able to dramatically increase the revenue by 20% just across the board, but when we compare the work that we're doing in these tests now to the control, it's a pretty clear 20%, and it's consistent. And so as we look at new feature and product development, we're looking at it through this lens now around the purchase flow, the conversion rate optimization, promos and discounts, and really looking at that retention metric in terms of being able to move behavior. And that's where we're looking at our product development. So road mapping growth. How do you actually get started with this approach? Well, the first step is to just get started. You don't need full-time resources to run a growth team. You really only need part-time people or pulling in part-time resources or pulling in a quasi-team of people across the organization. I mean, everybody's got ideas. So leverage the ideas from the crowd within your company. Talk to your customers, talk to your friends, talk to other people in the industry, talk to people that have been successful and not successful, right? So get ideas. The ideas are easy. What you want to do, though, is get somebody to functionally act as a growth lead. So taking all of those ideas and starting to distill them into actionable chunks. And that's not incredibly easy to do. You need somebody that's fairly organized, that can kind of tame the madness a little bit and, listen for all these ideas, but then really think strategically about what you should be working on and when. Because even running simple growth tests, that does come with some overhead. It does take some time to do. Again, pulling that cross-functional team and team members to support it. Generally, you can have quite a bit of fun with growth, and even kind of building a growth team on the fly. It gets people within your company much more engaged in the marketing and in the product development lifecycle, and you can open it up to folks that maybe wouldn't traditionally be doing that, at least from a full-time basis. Very important, though, you also need to be willing to take risks and also be comfortable setting boundaries if you need to. So if you've got executive stakeholders that are kind of skeptical about growth, set the right boundaries with them, work with them, but then take on some risk and start doing those 0 to 1 tests and really proving out that what you're working on has some value. When I showed you my initial examples, we had many failures before we had a win. At other companies that I've been at, we've had many failures before you get a win. So a lot of it is just doing the work. And as a general rule, you're going to want to be comfortable failing probably 4 times out of 5 on the growth side. Most experiments fail. In terms of frameworks for growth, there's a couple things that you can look at. You can look at the RICE framework. which is reach times impact times confident divided by effort. It comes up with a RICE score. This is actually something that was developed by Intercom. It's a really good framework for validating your ideas and kind of getting them into a matrix that lets you compare the different levels of effort against the potential return. There's the ICE framework. The second one with the 3 E's is one that I came up with. Might be a little bit cheesy, but I built it because I wanted to take levels of effort across the organization, not just engineering and not just product. And so I'll show you that in a minute. Or you can build your own. So you can get cross-team buy-in and you can come up with your own matrix for how you decide on what you develop in what order based on what's important to your company. So this is my ICE framework. So you'll look here, it's basically a test name and a hypothesis. So you always have to have a hypothesis. And then the way I measure this is impact, confidence, engineering effort, marketing effort, other effort, and then you get a score. And you can kind of look at the math in the equation here, but the higher score means that that's likely something that you should work on first because it's probably higher confidence, higher impact, and less effort. A lot of times you're going to have growth test candidates or feature candidates that are kind of middle of the road. I'd urge you to take some of the outliers on first. You'll generally, in the early days of doing this stuff, you'll have some really quick and easy wins. And it's really nice for a company to get some quick and easy wins, even if they're not giant, to give in multiple different stakeholders. Again, your executive team or your investors or anybody else who questions why you're spending time on growth. So this is one framework, but there's a bunch of them out there. The most important thing is that you track what you're working on, you understand what your control and baseline is, and you have some way to measure the impact of what you're doing. Which gets me into some growth dashboarding. This is just a really kind of standard growth dashboard that is fairly common when I'm doing growth stuff at different companies. We've got something very similar to this at Sandbox. We look at daily metrics. We also look at weekly metrics and monthly metrics. And a lot of what we look at is 7-day rolling metrics. So 7-day rolling revenue, 7-day booking revenue, 7-day signups. The daily revenue and the daily metrics, conversion metrics, tend to be a little bit spiky. So if you kind of look 7 days back and you sum up the last 7 days, you can get this much more kind of, more fluid, less spiky, less chunky set of graphs. And that's what we tend to look at. When I'm doing kind of growth advisory work or things like that, one of the first things that I'll often do is come up with a growth dashboard that's similar to this, that tracks the 3 to 10 most important metrics for the business and kind of religiously keep that thing updated every week at a minimum. And then you start to look at weekly conversion rates, month over month growth, and those other things that are really important to your business. So the growth dashboard that you come up with is going to be unique to your business. A B2B SaaS growth dashboard is going to be, MRR, ARR focused. It's going to be very revenue heavy. A consumer game is going to be very kind of engagement and metric, less revenue focused likely and more engagement and activation focused. So users and daily active users, things like that. It really is specific to your company and your industry, but I would urge you to just get started and start tracking this stuff manually on a weekly basis at a minimum. By having to update these numbers manually, either every day or every week, it's going to force you to own the metrics. And if you don't own the metrics, then nobody's going to own the metrics. So you should be able to rattle off your top metrics just from the hip every single day. So your top 5 metrics, you should know them in and out, whether you're a growth PM, a marketer, an executive, or just a regular product manager kind of working on the funnel. So that's an example of a growth dashboard. And that's about it. So yeah, I've got a couple resources here. Hit my personal site, growthminded.co/resources for some free growth stuff. I've also got a free intro to growth course that I built. Covers some of the stuff that I went through here, gets into a little bit more detail with some other topics, or just email me, Craig@growthminded.co. And I appreciate your time. Thanks for listening.